The number one measure of your strategy is what you put your resources behind, and we simply spread ourselves too thin. So that's the reason she gave Fortune magazine for releasing 4 studios and cutting 3,200 jobs. But it also means we get to see what Xbox really cares about. New IP is almost completely dead, and despite the claims that this was about management bloat in many cases, we've also seen so many experienced developers being cut. And what it all means is that now everything is about the biggest brands you know delivered as cheaply as possible. All to try and pin everything on one last throw of the dice, and that is getting games ready for the upcoming Project Helix. Phil Spencer's Xbox had to deal with the fallout of Don Matrick's Xbox, and now Asha Sharma is having to deal with the fallout of Phil Spencer's Xbox, which itself lost momentum with consoles. You see, Microsoft wanted subscription revenue, and I mean that across their business, so think Office 365. That meant, of course, Game Pass spread across PC, cloud, and it meant non-exclusive games. Thing is, though, this widespread did not work. Nothing met Microsoft's demands, Game Pass included. And we even have numbers on that. A Microsoft slide from the 2023 FTC hearings suggested they wanted 77 million subscribers on the service by July 2026. That did not happen. The Wall Street Journal sources suggest that after the 2025 price hike, they had 30 million. Now, Game Pass may be profitable on its own, but of course, the entire business was restructured around the chance of Game Pass redefining the consumer model for gaming. And that means that just profitable was not enough. They ended up with less than half the subscribers they projected. So this is then a strategic reset. A smaller portfolio of games from first and third parties, but bigger games, ones built to attract more players. And that's why they're cutting games and cutting studios. Ninja Theory, Arcane, Compulsion, Double Fine, and Undead Labs. All easy cuts. All the wrong kind of game studio for a post-Game Pass Xbox. Even at only 100 or so devs each, they're all Western teams paying Western wages. To overcome that cost, you need real commercial power, and most of those studios don't have it. Single-player games, new IPs, cult hits. That sort of thing. Now, it's fair to say that State of Decay almost breaks that trend, but it obviously was not enough. Those aren't the games Xbox wants in-house anymore. They'll be made externally instead. But we've already seen evidence that they might not be pushed towards exclusives, actually. Xbox have already cancelled many of their exclusive contracted third-party games in recent years. These include the likes of, say, with the Romeros. But we've also just seen one of the year's big developers take a hit, and that is 007 First Light developer IO Interactive, who have lost their Xbox funding for a new fantasy RPG. Xbox are, quote, shifting investment to focus on higher priority projects. That's what they say. And this has caused an Istanbul-based office to be shut down entirely, even though IO have been able to retain the IP for their new fantasy game. Remember how Sharma said no announced games would be cancelled? That's technically right. This Project Fantasy game was never announced. By contrast, you can imagine the reaction if they pulled, say, Hideo Kojima's funding for OD. That's likely why IGN reports that that game is safe, by the way. Xbox, then, are all about established brands or big popular decisions. But here's the thing, even within those established brands, that has not saved everyone. ZeniMax were hit particularly hard. An email sent to Bethesda staff says that they have to focus on our strongest franchises. Now, Jason Schreier's sources say that means Fallout, Elder Scrolls, Doom, Quake, and Wolfenstein. That's a little weird. In the company's Maryland base alone, WARN notices tell us that 379 jobs were lost. That's almost a quarter of the 1,600 from this round. And we can take a look at id Software, who have been brutalized. The Texas arm of the studio had nearly 200 staff. 136 of them are now gone. They were a Game Pass success last year. 3 million players against an estimated 800,000 copies sold. For the old Xbox, that's good. They put everything into growing Game Pass. For the new Xbox, that's bad, and now it has paid the price. But we can tell a lot about Xbox's future plans from how they've cut this studio right as the new DLC launched. A staffer told Aftermath that, quote, all but one person who helped run all our old titles was let go. That of course means that legacy games don't matter. Digital Foundry sources suggested that the industry-recognized id Tech team was now functionally gone. Unionization could not protect the Texas team. German worker regulations could not protect the Frankfurt studio. GamesBeat reported that they were gearing up pitches for a, quote, John Wick-style original game called Fury, a new game in the Perfect Dark franchise, and a multiplayer co-op version of Doom. But with the scale of these cuts, it's hard to see any of those games existing. It's hard to see id do anything other than support other studios. With the cuts made to the engine team, any new games in those franchises will likely use industry-standard engines like UE5. In a case like that, it's easier for outsourcing, and it can be easier to get new hires up to speed. But it sure seems it would be hard to make Doom or Quake with significantly less institutional knowledge, because those things aren't just IPs. They are games made by people. And if loads of those people are gone, you can make something called Doom. But will it actually be Doom? And if we're to stay with the ZeniMax shooters, probably best not to expect another Indiana Jones. That's real sad, because Golden Circle was an amazing game, but it seems clear that internal brands will be taking the focus from now on. Machine Games so far appears to be untouched. They are, of course, working on Wolfenstein 3, with a tie-in TV show coming to help with the marketing, which also helps to explain the fallout of it all. You see, the information reported that Microsoft felt the Fallout franchise was being underutilized, especially when it came to them actually benefiting from the TV show. Of course, they did benefit. There's around $80 million or so that they made from the existing games, but that could have been more, especially if, as an example, a game had have been rushed out to coincide with the show. That, of course, never goes wrong, like when PlayStation rushed out a Horizon remaster to tie into a show that ended up being cancelled in production. And that, of course, brings us to Obsidian, the studio that anchored Xbox's 2025. They even believed that The Outer Worlds 2 might be worth $80. Obsidian launched 3 games. All of those games were critically well received, but only one of them met Microsoft's expectations and sales, and that was the mostly outsourced Grounded 2. So, Obsidian just lost a quarter of their headcount. It basically feels like small, acclaimed projects like, say, Pentiment simply won't fly. In fact, we actually know that none of Obsidian's games will. None. Details of an internal strategy meeting passed over to Bloomberg revealed that Avowed 2 is paused, and that only one project is happening at the company, a new Fallout game led by Josh Sawyer of Fallout New Vegas fame. But here's the thing, it was not meant to be a Fallout game. It was actually a new IP. As the quote goes, it was a role-playing game that was similar structurally and thematically to Fallout, but was not part of the franchise. Now, that game is being reskinned, I suppose, so that Xbox can have a Fallout game whilst Bethesda are away working on the Elder Scrolls. Because hey, there will be more seasons of the TV show, there needs to be more game to coincide with that, and right now, the only type of game that matters is one that's in a huge brand. Now, The Elder Scrolls is both the easiest and the hardest to explain. The 2018 reveal of The Elder Scrolls 6 was a calculation, one meant to stop frustration over the mobile-only Elder Scrolls Blades. Funnily enough, Blades just ended service on the 30th of June. Perhaps not a coincidence. But full development did not start on Elder Scrolls 6 until 2024, after Starfield launched. So even with some layoffs, it is really no surprise that a 4-year development cycle, just like Starfield's, has Schreier sources suggesting 2028 at the earliest. It's almost certainly going to be one of Xbox's big flagship games that, if it's able to coincide with Project Helix, is perhaps something they think will be a system seller. But just because The Elder Scrolls is important doesn't mean it's safe. Elder Scrolls Online is not safe at all. Fresh off a mass layoff round last year, alongside the cancellation of their next MMO, ZeniMax Online has once again been gutted. In this case, 213 people are gone. In 2025, staff described the mood at the studio. It's difficult to work when you're looking at a graveyard. Now that graveyard is doubled up with bodies, as the team has got to reorganize their new monetization and content schedule. Again, both of these are Elder Scrolls games, but Xbox would rather invest in the potential of a major payday in a few years than a live service that they specifically called out as being core to the company, not a few years ago, but a few months ago. That's how quick all of this is happening, and it's all amounting to a future that looks very different indeed. Xbox aren't solely making franchise games and remakes while pumping money into Minecraft and King. It's true that Kojima's OD still exists, and Jason Schreier reports that Activision's new Elsewhere studio are still making their new RPG. But that can only exist because it's part of a bigger, financially successful infrastructure, and perhaps more importantly, because it's in Poland, staffed with ex-CDPR and massive devs who, most importantly, for the bottom line, are being paid at non-American salaries. Similarly, they still want third parties on their platform, but that's because the plan, as stated, is now solely about that platform. In that Fortune interview that I quoted at the very start of the video, the suggestion is that 80% of Xbox's revenue still comes through the console, not PC, not Game Pass, cloud, or anything else, the console. So that is where they want to focus their efforts. Even now, Bloomberg reports that the idea of more exclusives is being floated to get people on Xbox's systems. That might be why, as Derek Strickland spotted, Xbox appear to be treating content, hardware, platforms, and services as distinct business units from now on. Of course, despite limited console sales and hardware price increases, Xbox want people on their console platform. But here's the thing. Just like with games, they've stripped out so much of the company's experience in these areas that it seems they may yet struggle to achieve it. I mean, the man who created Xbox FanFest is gone. The accessibility team has been shredded. Kevin LaChapelle, vice president of platform, is gone. And that's despite him leading Xbox's backward compatibility team and building the cloud product. Sharma's 14 layers of management did appear to contain a lot of experience. Much of that is being gutted, and expensive senior talent, the types of people who lead projects, well, they're being gotten rid of while being framed as being corporate bloat. And the overall trend of Xbox's plan makes that extremely risky. Take everything at face value here, right? Assume that the billion-user target isn't impossible, and that we don't hear about half the studios closing next year. Then there's only one clear target for them to pursue. And that, obviously, is Helix. Because I think we all know that Xbox Series is terminally behind the competition. That means they are putting everything into this one last throw of the dice. Whatever the hardware crisis permits Helix to be, everything we've heard from Xbox over the last few months says that it is also their absolute last chance. They have just fired so many experienced staff. They are publicly kind of rejecting cloud and mobile gaming in their interviews, all of course while also pursuing those things with Mojang and King, and constantly talking about hardware exclusives. And that is where we come back to the year 2028. Holiday 27 and early 2028 are the expected release dates for Project Helix's release. And so, having games like Elder Scrolls 6 or any other major brands around that launch window becomes worth throwing resources at, so that they guarantee they hit the release target, regardless of how many small games and new opportunities are lost along the way. The plan is for massive franchise games that will draw audiences and get hardware sales up. But if that does not work, it is not clear what Xbox actually have left to pivot to as a hardware business or a games software business. Basically, this is a Hail Mary. Your particular franchise of choice being important and having lots of money thrown into it may sound like a good thing, but it also could be a bit more like the Eye of Sauron. I mean, for a Microsoft-owned example, we need only look at Call of Duty, right? And even before Microsoft bought them, this thing still applies. Call of Duty is existentially important to Activision, right? You would think that would mean that they would never shit out a bad Call of Duty, because if you do that, you deeply risk the future of the franchise. Well, that didn't stop them with Black Ops 7, did it? Being a bit of a shit heap and performing as weakly as it did, that actually may have driven loads of the cuts that we've just seen, because its financial underperformance hurt them that badly. What we can learn from that is that being important means you'll get resources, but it also means you absolutely must ship when the business needs you to ship, absolutely no matter what. That is not good for the quality of games. It does not instill confidence, And I just have to wonder, with Project Helix, will Xbox find themselves in a similar place as with Series, where they drop the console and the plan is to have a big system seller like, say, Halo Infinite, but then it all just goes a bit wrong. There is, though, one little ray of hope for them, and it's really simple. It's Sony, because the one saving grace Xbox have had is that Sony have fumbled their commanding lead within this generation. Of course, the most recent example of that is with physical games. Who knows, maybe Microsoft will reappraise their plans, and they'll actually decide to go for discs with Project Helix simply because it'll differentiate them in the market. Who knows, but Sony do like to fumble bags, and if you want to learn about the latest one they fumbled, check out this video next.